Welcome everyone. This is the Network Heating and Cooling webinar on the topic of ground source heat and smart local energy systems. My name is Dr. Andy Smallbone. I'm an associate professor at Durham, and this event is organised through the EPSRC Network Plus for the decarbonisation of heating and cooling, and is part of a series looking at the different challenges of decarbonising heating and cooling across various sectors and across different behaviours. This week, we're welcoming three speakers on the subject of ground source and smart local energy systems who will provide their own thoughts from an academic and an industry perspective. The first talk is of the working paper, The Decarbonisation of Heating, How Smart Local Energy Systems Contribute. And then we have a second speaker who's talking about the past, present and future of ground source heating. So first, I want to introduce Dr. Madeleine Morris and Jeff Hardy from the Energy Revolution Research Consortium, which is hosted at the Imperial College, London, and they will present on recent research published in their working paper. So there will be two people talking, and in the first, we will hear from Jeff Hardy, but we will also hear from Madeleine Morris, who is a research associate in the Grantham Institute for Climate Change and the Environment, and she works in the Energy Revolution Research Consortium in the Policy, Regulation and Innovation Frameworks. Dr. Jeff Hardy is a Senior Research Fellow at the Grantham Institute, where he works on future low-carbon energy systems and what they might look like, how people will engage with it, and what business will be operating in it. So,
good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to Andrew and Jackie for the invite today. We're really pleased to be able to come and speak to this group. We're really looking forward to your questions afterwards. And we're here to talk to you about some work that we've been doing as part of the Energy Revolution Research Consortium. And I will explain what on earth that consortium is in the next slide. And the report that we're talking about today is the one on the title slide there. The Energy Revolution Research Consortium is part of the government's Prospering from the Energy Revolution, which is one of their industrial strategy challenge funds, if you recall them. So this is a project that was aiming to demonstrate what smart local energy systems of the future could look like by trying them out today in real places across the UK. So it's a program that's been demonstrating these smart local energy systems in real places like in Oxfordshire or the Isle of Orkney. And it's also been doing other things like design trials and concept trials as well. We as a research consortium, we sit alongside that program. So we've got a privilege of actually working within a real big demonstration program. And what we're doing is a mixture of things. We are undertaking systematic research and analysis to look at the longer term requirements and innovations of these smart local energy systems. We are helping inform some of those projects' plans by helping them think through the implications of delivery and scaling or replicability. And we're also bringing in knowledge that exists elsewhere that's relevant, so integrating knowledge from global activities. And the consortium itself is one of many universities. We have 22 different universities involved. We have 32 co-investigators and a total of about 50 researchers. And what we're doing is all around smart local energy systems. I will try and explain briefly what they are in a minute. And we're looking at these from an interdisciplinary and whole systems point of view. And the way in which we construct our research is really across cross-cutting challenges. So we look at the smart elements in data and artificial intelligence. We look at the business models and the finance and the investability of these smart local energy systems. I lead the work on the institutions, which is looking at policy, regulation and markets and governance issues. I'm an ex-regulator from Ofgem in my past. We also think about the actors, the end users, the citizens, the customers, the consumers, the local authorities, the community energy groups, etc. We think about everything from a whole systems point of view. So we think about electricity, heat and transport within these systems and how they integrate. And we also think about how these systems integrate with wider systems like the environment and so forth. This is the team. So obviously the Imperial College contingent is here today, but actually it's a team that's based all around the country. We're very smiley, as you can tell from this. We all enjoy our work immensely. But what we're all striving towards in our team is to answer this overarching research question. do we have the appropriate policy, institutional and regulatory frameworks to realize the potential of these smart local energy systems? So most of what we do is aimed at that question. If you're interested in seeing some of the other reports we've produced, this heat report we're talking about today is the third of our policy and regulatory landscape review series. We'll explain a little bit about how we do them, but they're all systematic reviews. The first one's on electricity storage and electric vehicles, the second one on emerging digital energy platforms, and this one on heat. And they're all available on the Energy Rev website at the link below. So I probably don't need to talk to this audience very much about this slide, actually. But the reason why we've done all three of those reports is each one of them is focused on something that all of these demonstration and design projects are looking at. Those are common elements of these smart local energy systems. And heating is clearly one of the very important elements we need to get right if we're going to hit zero carbon goals and if we're going to do so in a fair and just way. I think this audience knows very well how much heat accounts in terms of carbon emissions, but there it is, it's 37%. 76% of UK buildings are heated by gas, just 8% of heat is from renewable resources, and 60% of homes are rated at less than EPC Band C. So we do not have a particularly energy efficient housing stock. And there was that study from Tado that showed that UK homes leak heat quite a lot faster than other European countries. Compared to electricity and transport, heat has seen less progress and is somewhat siloed from other parts of the energy system as a separate heat problem. And the fact that heating systems are in people's homes and in people's businesses make it more than a technical challenges. Without significant changes, the transition is likely to exacerbate social inequalities. People cannot necessarily afford these technologies. Those who are on less money tend to be in worse quality housing, etc. So as a consequence of all of that stuff, decarbonisation is essentially both a systemic and a wicked problem. And a wicked problem basically means it's very complex and no one actor has the solutions to fixing it. So the second part of this is why are we adopting a smart and local approach? Obviously it's quite obvious that heat is inherently local. It's generated close to demand in homes, businesses, schools, and communities. Even heat networks, which transfer, heat over some distance, tend to be very local in nature. To date, the government has mostly approached heat as a sort of siloed top-down problem rather than a local bottom-up challenge. Heat is going to have to be smart because a lot of the direction of travel is towards electrification of heat, but also integrating more heat networks with a variety of heat sources. And that's going to give us a lot of interesting challenges in terms of short-term and inter-seasonal variation of demand. So within day, but also across seasons, summer to winter. And these are exacerbated in a more electricity-driven future because electricity obviously has to balance supply and demand on a second-by-second basis. And also it's a systemic challenge because you have all of the variable output renewables, big aspirations coming up, even bigger aspirations coming up on wind and solar, we think next week from government. We have electric vehicles and we have decarbonised heat, all in similar places, all happening in certain places around the country. So balancing available supply with these new demands is going to be absolutely critical to building the most efficient and hopefully smallest energy system that we need to meet our demands in the future. So that's why we did this review. What we were trying to understand was the policy, the regulation, and the market structures in the UK around decarbonisation of heat, and then to use the evidence from this to identify the gaps and barriers to the emergence and success of SLES, so smart local energy systems. We abbreviate it to SLES, so if I do say that, I apologise. It's just an internal consortium shorthand. Right, I think I'm handing over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. So I'll talk a little bit about the process that we used for these reviews and then introduce some of the findings, and then toward the end I'll hand back to Jeff, who will introduce more about how we compare our findings to the approaches that were released by both the UK and Scottish governments back in October. So for this review, as well as the other two in the same series, we adopted a rigorous systematic search and review process. The full methodology is in the reports, but very briefly, we systematically searched for relevant literature, but we supplemented that search strategy by kind of putting out a public call for evidence to ask people to send us relevant literature that we really needed to read. And it's worth noting that the literature we were focusing on was the grey literature, so not academic literature, although some of that was included, but we were going right to the source, right to the government documents. We then put it through a review process and categorised into themes using an inductive coding method. And what we found was that a lot of the issues that were coming out of this evidence were classed as what we call cross-cutting barriers. And what I mean by that is that they are not technology specific. And so in this report, we focused on these cross-cutting barriers because we're aware that there's a lot of great work that's coming out at the moment that is technology specific, including from one of our sister institutes at Imperial, the Energy Futures Lab. And we also were very aware of the fact that with cross-cutting barriers, if you address these, you could actually unlock multiple technology pathways. And so in this review, that's what we focused on. And we looked for evidence of where smart and local approaches were already being adopted to heat decarbonisation. And what we found was that there's quite a lot of evidence of either smart or local approaches, but there's a lack of evidence where those two elements are being brought together. So in the rest of this presentation, I'll summarise what the barriers are and why we think taking a smart and local approach could be helpful in addressing these. So what are these cross-cutting barriers? There's 5 of them: information, engagement and behaviour, strategy, policy and regulation, infrastructure, supply chain and skills, and distribution of costs and impacts. And it's worth just noting here that these barriers are not unrelated, and in fact that we did find that they often intersect with each other and exacerbate each other at times as well, and I'll note some instances of that. So on information, engagement, behaviour, it's well accepted that quite a lot of behaviour change is going to be needed at household and individual levels to decarbonise heat, whether that is a sort of one-off decision about energy efficiency upgrades or choosing which heating system to replace a gas boiler with, or whether it's longer-term changes in how we actually use and interact with our energy systems. At the moment, we do not know enough about how to engage with people on heat and how to decarbonise it, and we're way behind the power sector in our understanding of how to effectively engage with customers. We do know that public awareness of the need to make changes in homes is very low. Awareness of alternatives to fossil gas boilers is even lower, and there are issues, both real and perceived, with zero carbon heat technologies, which means that there's trust and acceptability issues there. We also know that information alone is not enough to induce behaviour change, and so we're going to need better methods of inducing rapid behaviour change. On strategy, policy and regulation, successive governments in the UK haven't put in place the robust long-term strategies for heat decarbonisation that we really need, ones that should be integrating heat with the rest of the energy system. As Jeff mentioned, it's quite siloed at the moment. It's been treated as sort of separate to the rest of the energy system, and regulation has been inconsistent. So for example, heat networks have historically been unregulated. That's obviously changing now, but policy has been stop-start, particularly when it comes to building energy efficiencies, and we're seeing some of the barriers that's causing now. This has left consumers at risk. It's left us with a thermally inefficient building stock, coupled with one of the highest reliances on gas heating in Europe, and that is really kind of the crux of this issue here. The cross-cutting issues relating to infrastructure challenges that we found broadly fell into 3 categories. The first is, how are we going to repurpose existing infrastructure like the gas network? How much of the same infrastructure like electricity generation are we going to need to build? And also, where are we going to need to build it? And how can we overcome issues with existing infrastructure like our old, inefficient and very heterogeneous building stock? And there's also tensions between accommodating new infrastructure such as heat networks and then the presence of existing networks where there can sometimes be issues of priority and permissions. Without a clear long-term strategy, these questions are really difficult to answer, and there's a risk of technology lock-in to infrastructure that's perhaps more expensive and less efficient than it should be. And that's one of the examples of where these barriers intersect with each other. On skills and the supply chain, the UK currently doesn't have the capacity to deliver the millions of energy efficiency upgrades and heating installations over the next 3 decades. We need to build strong supply chains and provide training opportunities to new workers, but also the existing workers across the sector. We also need innovative business models that could help to take away some of the consumer risk and uncertainty. But at the moment, businesses need certainty to be able to invest in new skills and business models. They don't have that because there's been a lack of strategy. And the current licensing arrangements provide a barrier to innovation in some cases, which Ofgem has recognised and is working to address. And then finally, on distribution of costs and impacts. The transition is going to incur costs, but there's a high level of uncertainty around how these costs could and should be distributed. Relative costs of gas and electricity are obviously skewed because of how social and environmental policies are levied disproportionately onto electricity bills. And we also find that the co-impacts aren't fully appreciated in evaluations of decarbonisation impacts. And when I say co-impacts, what I mean is the kind of non-carbon benefits, the health and economic impacts, and the negative impacts of fossil fuel heating, living in poorly insulated homes. These negative impacts already disproportionately affect those in fuel poverty. And what that means is that without a redistribution of costs, decarbonisation on current trajectories is likely to exacerbate fuel poverty. So you saw this a little early on Jeff's slide. This is the SLES Prism, the Smart Local Energy Systems Prism. We first introduced this in a previous report on post-pandemic recovery, how smart local energy systems contribute. In this, we introduced the concept of the 6 key elements, unique elements of a SLES approach. We used that as a framework to assess how you could get essentially more bang for your buck when it came to post-pandemic recovery. And here we're using the same prism to explore how smart local energy systems could help to overcome each of the 5 cross-cutting barriers. And so those key elements are the local knowledge held by local actors, the trust and the ability to engage with different groups, coordinated approaches to planning, opportunities to align with local plans, the ability to capture local co-benefits of investment, and the opportunities for scale-up and replicability of solutions. So I'll now map that SLES prism against each of the barriers to outline where we think that approach can address these barriers. So drawing on the local knowledge and the trust, the relative trust in local actors like businesses, local authorities, community groups, this could facilitate effective engagement between consumers and national actors to develop understanding that we don't have on the needs, the priorities and the drivers in this area. Smart business models like heat as a service could also avoid the need for some behavioural changes or create completely new social practices by transferring some of the risk and responsibility away from consumers. And approaches that centre local societal co-benefits like health, alleviation of fuel poverty, job creation, these are likely to be much stronger and more acceptable to people than those that centre carbon emission reductions as a primary driver. A smart local energy system approach could also aid the development of coordinated plans which align heat decarbonisation strategies with infrastructure requirements, as well as existing goals and statutory duties of local authorities, things like the health and well-being of local communities. And a smart and place-based approach is projected to be cheaper than a national top-down approach that's currently being adopted by government. Local knowledge is absolutely key for creating these kind of strategies for businesses to be able to deliver zero carbon heating. We found that local knowledge and coordinated planning could also help to determine which pathway is most suited for a particular community or region, given its resources and priorities that are integrated across the whole energy system. Existing local engagement and trust channels of local actors could help to communicate the decisions and measures effectively. That could help with some of the trust issues that are there. And they could support and inform national decisions on how to answer those questions like, what do we do with old infrastructure? Where do we put new infrastructure? And then given the likely regional variations in solutions that are probably going to be needed for heat, supply chains will need to be developed locally, at least to some extent, Taking advantage of local knowledge of assets and opportunities and needs could help to align heat decarbonisation efforts with local economic strategies, developing skills and training opportunities and creating jobs. Local leaders are really well placed to coordinate these efforts, and local authorities can leverage their purchasing powers to catalyse scale-up and strengthening of supplies. And then finally, a SLES approach is projected to lower the overall costs of decarbonisation versus national top-down approaches. There's lots of societal co-benefits that could come with a transformation of the heat sector, but these are not guaranteed. Local actors are ideally placed to not only identify which benefits might be most urgently needed in their area, but also to develop these plans, these smart plans that will enable multiple benefits to be captured. And now I'm going to hand back to Jeff, who'll cover the government considerations that we took a look at.
Thank you, Maddie. So you've seen where the kind of like the brunt of the analysis in the report kind of landed in terms of the challenges, the cross-cutting challenges, and then how a local approach could help. So we were lucky enough that during our analysis, both the Scottish and Westminster government produced heating strategies. So we were able to look at our analysis and then map it against whether or not the strategies that had been published were addressing any of those cross-cutting barriers. So this is a really quick analysis. If you want to see the detail, then do read the report. But basically, in the UK government report, there were no major announcements relating to information, engagement and behaviour. And in fact, a quick Control F through the heat strategy revealed that engagement and information was indeed mentioned several times as a barrier, but there was nothing to address it. In Scotland, there was an announcement for a national public energy agency to be launched in Scotland to address some of those issues. In terms of strategy, policy and regulation, then in the UK heat and building strategy, there was a recognition of the role of local authorities and local actors, but no additional duties to be placed upon them. Comparing that with Scotland, then there was a new statutory duty proposed for all local authorities to develop local heat and energy efficiency plans. So basically putting onus on the local authority. And in both places, new home standards are being developed and fossil fuel bans on boilers and so forth have been signalled, but we don't know exactly what's going to happen with that and how firm that ban is. In terms of infrastructure, both reports put support forward for heat networks, and that's been relatively consistent. And the decision on whether there will be hydrogen for heating will be taken, this is a matter for UK government, will be taken in 2026. We're going to see supply chain and skills action plans coming 2022. And there is some focus on innovation and supply chain to drive down costs. So basically, there will be some grants for, say, heat pumps in the UK, but the brunt of those that are expected to be delivered, the 600,000 target mid-decade, have to be met by business and innovation models at the moment as it is. And there are some interest-free loans in Scotland for energy efficiency. Bringing it all together in terms of recommendations. So I think we put together something like about 9 recommendations in the final report, maybe a little bit more. So there was a big role for central government. And one of the big roles for central government was to consider how it can put in place a vision for heating alongside a wider energy decarbonisation strategy in the UK. So to provide that certainty, but then to devolve some powers and responsibilities down to local government and or local actors, depending on the most appropriate. So from a central government point of view, there are a bunch of key decisions that need to be taken as soon as possible. The future of the gas grid, for example, would be one really big ticket item, which is just hanging at the moment. All sorts of other things. How are we going to roll out a lot of those other technologies? What are we going to do about energy efficiency, etc.? If there is going to be a devolution of powers and responsibilities down to a more local level, where it appears that a lot of these actions are better suited to be taken at that level, then those local authorities and local actors are going to need to have the resources and the capabilities commensurate with delivering those ambitions. Government has already signalled that it will bring heat network regulation under Ofgem's remit, but that hasn't happened yet. So heat network are regulated separately to other forms of heating, say electric or gas heating. And there is a review of cost distributions for societal and environmental impact. So as Maddie was talking about, the discrepancy between levies on the electricity and gas bill and wider discussions about whether they should even be in the bills or whether they should be in general taxation. That's a review we're expecting at some point this year, but we still don't know what it's going to say. And then in terms of the sorts of powers and responsibilities that could come down to local government, there could be responsibilities on energy efficiency of buildings. So requiring to get that building energy efficiency up in both existing and new build, a responsibility to engage with businesses and consumers in areas, to have that conversation and that engagement about zero carbon heating and wider zero carbon energy, a requirement to work with network and system operators. So this is a kind of like it's an ad hoc relationship at the moment, but strategic development of those networks is really critical to making sure you can accommodate all of that new demand for heat or new vectors for heat. There's a reasonable argument that local authorities are much better at dispersing grant funding, say for energy efficiency and for other measures. That's certainly what was found, contrast what happened with the Clean Home grants and those that were distributed from local authorities. And they could also coordinate the skills and training within a place to recognise the skills that will be needed in that locality. And then in terms of the energy regulator Ofgem, then we think there will be a need for innovative energy business models of the nature that Maddie described. So businesses that are going to help customers on this complex journey to help with the upfront costs of some of these technologies and maybe help with the complex energy system interactions, dynamic pricing, all of that kind of thing. So we would expect more innovative energy businesses to be coming through, but the regulator is going to have to create space for those to emerge. Most of these business models are not allowed through the current supplier hub approach and the current supply license. And that is it from us. So all of this stuff is available in the report, which is online. Looking forward to your questions at the end of the session.